Please be seated, and good morning. So good to be with you. This joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. Today's message will draw from James's letter and Mark's gospel. In Mark's gospel, Jesus is walking with the disciples when he overhears them debating their status. He has already told them that he is on his way to Calvary and then to be resurrected on the third day. Perhaps the disciples were already missing him and starting to grieve the loss. After all, they had traveled the better part of 3 years together. It must have been hard to see Jesus being this vulnerable. It made them feel vulnerable too. Hey, what about me, they must have thought. And so, out of a very human sense of anxiety, they tried to put themselves at his right hand and his left. They can't imagine serving without him, so naturally they project themselves to continually be with him. Jesus questions them about their motives, but they were afraid to say anything more to the one who hears everything. I remember once going to a large, prestigious church on a Sunday morning. As we settled in before the start of the service, I was saying good morning to someone in the pew in front of me. Suddenly, we could hear the pastor's voice over the booming sound system, but he was not in the room. He was in the vesting room conversing with a server, and it seemed he had inserted the batteries into his wireless mic and dropped it down into his pocket without realizing it was switched on. And the congregants looked around with surprised expressions, and some people started giggling. Some snickered. I was just hoping he wasn't heading into the restroom anytime soon. Not the best day for visitors, for sure. But then it got worse, because someone came to the door of that vesting room to ask him a question. And we barely heard the question, but we did hear a brief response. And the pastor's commentary didn't stop there. That's why you're hearing about it in this sermon today. What followed were a couple of disparaging remarks once that parishioner was out of earshot. But what we heard was loud and clear. Then the person who had been gossiped about appeared in the worship space, and as you might imagine, the giggles and the snickering went silent. A slightly reluctant but kind friend took her by the arm and gently shared what had transpired. Then the pastor walked in, and some brave soul explained to him how everything he had said had actually been heard by everyone else there. The woman left the room abruptly. Then and there, the pastor tried to apologize to his flock. You know when someone opens their mouth to apologize and in so doing starts to dig a hole? And the more they say, the deeper the hole gets? That's all I remember from that day, a big hole. I wasn't a regular at that church, but I imagine that man was apologizing and digging for months for what took only a few seconds to set off. Believe me, I'm OCD with my wireless mic. I'm going to check it at least 1,000 times today. That'll be my aerobic exercise for today. But I'm telling you, I can still mess up, right? So remember this, when it comes to God, your mic is always on. There's a good part of that too. But this relates to the opening prayer in our worship service, which describes God as one from whom no secrets are hid. James goes on to say that one use of the tongue can convey heavenly wisdom, or it can convey earthly wisdom. Both are powerful. James here is encouraging each and every disciple in the church to ask for God's wisdom. So Jesus overhears the disciples jockeying for position. Yes, their mics were on the whole time. They think they are talking about and therefore practicing things heavenly, but they are missing the point with all of their selfish posturing. These are the people, after all, that Jesus is hoping to carry on the mission after he's gone. This is his varsity team, his first picks. They are his plan. He doesn't have another plan. They are it. And just like them, we are being counted on in these important and opportune times. We're either going to be remembered for choosing to bless or to curse. But take heart and be assured of this: the one who overhears you and me and sees what we don't see, the one who knows more about us than we'll ever know, also wants to guide our steps by lighting our path with God's holy and living word. And not just individually, you and me, but by raising up the Christian community around us. Psychologist Carl Jung said, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, then the world will tell you." That's why you and I need to be formed and fashioned within a healthy faith community who tells us and reminds us who we really are. That's why we do godly play and children's chapel with the kids. That's why we have youth group and camps at the Domain. That's why we offer several groups for adults. And that's why we renew our vows whenever we baptize someone. Because we can't effectively Lone Ranger our faith lives, at least not for very long. And we don't have to when we worship, learn, and pray stronger together. Famous music producer Brian Eno talked about the topic of genius once in an interview. Geniuses are not solely a product of their own doing, he noted. Yes, they have outstanding talents and originality, but many of their creative gifts can be attributed to the artistic movements of their day. Their best potential was realized, and our best potential as Christians is realized within the genius of community itself. As a community, are we developing servant hearts here? Yes, I believe we are. And in our upcoming pictorial directory, for instance, we'll see the beautiful variety of people God is calling to be the hands and feet of Christ in this community. Newcomers and longtime members who call Good Shepherd home. Together we ask an open-ended question about what will be blessed in our actions. We are blessed to be a blessing, and what will that look like? James says, you do not have because you do not ask. You do not receive because you ask wrongly. What is it you and I are truly asking God? For instance, do we ask God for ways to serve, or are we more concerned with how to be served? It's interesting that the word serve has to do with community, building up. The word deserve, which makes our word deserve, is about what we feel we're entitled to. Our presiding bishop, Michael Curry, says the opposite of love is not hate, but selfishness. So let's ask God for heavenly wisdom. Let's ask God for ways we can be of service. The disciples' preoccupation with their own status is why Jesus responds to their discussion on who is the greatest by showing them this child. Jesus is not saying, be a child as in be childish, perhaps to be open and to trust like a child, though. But Jesus is saying that their work as disciples and our work as disciples is to accept God's call with humility, to live simply, making room in our lives in order to be available to God, to be hospitable to our neighbor. This is the message of Christian minimalism. As we are willing to put heavenly wisdom into the world, as James says, as a simple servant for the kingdom things that matter most. Lately, I've been thinking about the word service a lot. It keeps coming up in conversation, and when you start to ponder on a word, sometimes you hear it every time it's around you. But I've been thinking about it in terms of worship service, Christian service, repair service, service bay, customer service. This week, my car died in my driveway in Wilmore, so I called a tow service to take my car to Lexington. The guy who showed up was congenial, and we talked for a bit about the car. Then he said something about praising God for this day, yada, yada, yada. But that's when I noticed a subtle shift happening in my perspective and my mood, a softening, because he was praising God for the day. I told him that I'm a pastor and that I really needed to hear his praise for God today. All morning long, I had dreaded the time this had taken, because heaven knows I'm so busy, because I've got so many important things to do besides this. And it's funny how God can take a down moment and use it to teach us. Well, I began to sense God's presence stirring. I wondered if this was one of those times with him entertaining angels unawares. In a calm voice, he peered over the engine with his smiling face and asked, "Is this the original battery?" I thought to myself, angels with grease under their fingernails ask questions like this. "Yes," I said, "I guess it is. From 2016? Well," he continued, "most batteries last 3 to 5 years. Your problem is not the alternator," he said. "I think your battery is old and out of juice." And I thought to myself, you don't know how true that is, brother. And man, that'll preach. He helped me get the car started, and he said, I should be able to make it to Lexington as long as I went straight there and didn't stop the engine. He put his tools in the back, and as I walked around the rear of his vehicle to thank him, I saw a sign on the back windshield. In big letters, one word. It wasn't the name of his company or his name or some political sticker. The word was service. His mission statement in a word. I knew then that perhaps a better and wiser angel had visited me that morning. And you know, I have to tell you, I did make it into the service bay in Lexington. My car was running for a long time, and I asked the guy at the counter how long this might take, and he said, "Well, I don't know, sir." And I said, "Well, I'm hungry. I haven't had anything to eat or my coffee today. And I'm going to go stand over there in the customer service area where the basket of snacks is, and the fruit, and the coffee machine, and I'll just be there until a car comes back out." 20 minutes later, I'm not kidding, my car was back on. I wasn't proud of that, and I guess I'm still learning. Sometimes it's in the small moments, too, where we can bless or curse, when we remember that our mic is always on. And having our mic on with God can be a good thing too, a connection. It can be reassuring to know that God is just an utterance away. What are you asking God these days? Because asking for what the world can't give you just might be the start, or maybe in some cases the restart, that God wants for you. Amen.